Dobre. A ja si vypnem zatiaľ kameru a mikrofón a zapnem si, až keď budem reagovať, aby ste tu nemali nejaké rušivé zvuky.
Dobre, ďakujem.
Čas. Tak jo, a zůstáváme tady asi v angličtině, protože tam tím Ivana, Božič a Karel Němeček,
Okay. Thank you very much, and welcome to our research afternoon. So my name is Alica Synek Rétiová, and together with my colleague Karel Němeček here on my right side, and Ivana Rapoš Božič, who is our colleague who connected from Ljubljana, so she's online. We are writing this paper, and today we would like to present you work in progress. It's a draft of a paper that is called It Makes Me Feel Like Home. And the topic is about implication of place attachment for immigrants. Two groups of immigrants from Middle East and North Africa region and from Sub-Saharan Africa, and how they form the sense of belonging in the city of Brno through attachment to different types of places in the urban space of Brno. So as I said, this is a work in progress, and we would very welcome your feedback and any comments or questions that would help us to improve and finish this paper. Next. Second slide. Now, okay. So this paper is one of the outcomes of the ongoing research project, three-year-long qualitative research project, currently in its final year, that is called People Like Us, a Reverse Sociology of Migration. So why a reverse sociology? I will just briefly introduce to you the project, so you can put this effort that we are presenting to today in a broader picture. So it is a reverse sociology because the study of migration has largely been a story that privileges the perspectives of us in destination countries. And this us being a label for mainstream or majority society. So in our project, we shift this perspective and we make immigrants our sociological mainstream. So we are interested in their experiences, perceptions, and also self-positioning of immigrants vis-a-vis of different groups of immigrants vis-a-vis the destination society, the Czech society. And in our research, in the whole project, we stress agency and reflective capacity of immigrants, not passive victims or objects in the migration studies, but active agents and producers of meanings. Okay, so now I would like to present to you theories and concepts that we are using in this paper. So first of all, we respond to the recent call to adopt place as a lens perspective. This means using place as an entry point to study human movements and mobilities. And the main premise is that place and mobilities are mutually co-constitutive. So what does this mean? It means that mobilities shape places by leaving permanent traces in places, and places shape mobilities by carrying out their agency through physical environment, physical infrastructures in the cities, through social relationships, and also symbolic meanings. And this perspective, place as a lens, can be also understood as an effort to overcome methodological nationalism. You probably are familiar with the concept of methodological nationalism, which means taking nation as a natural unit of analysis, So in our paper, we shift this perspective towards specific places in the city, in the everyday context of immigrants. Another concept is sense of belonging. So we follow Yuval Davis in defining sense of belonging, the politics of belonging, as feeling at home, feeling free, or feeling safe. And we understand belonging not as a fixity, but as a dynamic process that is being negotiated through place-specific social interactions of immigrants in the context of a city. And this concept of belonging is closely related to homemaking practices, to making oneself feel like home. We follow premise of Bocani that human beings are compelled to make homes. And homemaking captures the phenomenological and subjective sides of immigrant experience. We will be talking a lot about place attachment. So now I would like to define the concept of place attachment and then also the strong program in cultural sociology. But first, place attachment. So what is a place attachment? We understand it as a set of affects, resonances, and experiences that tie people to places. And in the same way as sense of belonging, we understand it as a process, as a constant negotiation, not as something fixed relationship, but something that is in process. We stress three dimensions of place attachment, which is social dimension, material, and affective dimension. So basically, we can say that place attachment is the social, material, and affective resonance with a particular place. Research shows that place attachment plays a strong role in citizen behaviors among recent migrants and also in their staying intention. So that's why this is a crucial concept for our research. And lastly, we also follow the strong program in cultural sociology that helps us to shift our focus towards symbolic dimension of social life and meaning-making processes of social actors, in our case, specific groups of immigrants. Our main research question is, how do Brno residents of MENA, Middle East and North Africa region, and Sub-Saharan African origin establish or foster sense of belonging through different types of place attachment in the city? So now briefly about our methodology and methods. So as I already said, we focus on immigrants from MENA and Sub-Saharan Africa, and our sampling criteria were at least 5 years of residence in the city of Brno. We interviewed people that arrived as adults to Czechia, at least high school education, and we strive for diversity with respect to gender and country of origin in our sample. So altogether, we conducted 22 interviews, semi-structured, comprehensive, in-depth interviews, 11 with migrants from MENA countries and 11 with migrants from Sub-Saharan Africa. And out of these 22, we selected 10 research participants with whom we conducted these go-along interviews. I don't know if you are familiar with the concept of go-alongs. So these are mobile interviews that integrate walking and talking through the city of Brno. And this shared experience of a city walk foster a deeper understanding of how immigrants experience and interact with the public space in their everyday lives. So in our analysis, we also followed this meaning-centered interpretive approach of cultural sociology that focused our attention on meaning-making practices of immigrants. Two things are important to mention in relation to context of our research. And the first one is Brno as a city in transition. So we explore experiences of immigrants living in the city of Brno that we frame as a city in transition. This is because Brno has been at the forefront of the country's economic but also demographic development. So you can see in brackets that the percentage of immigrants living in Brno basically doubled, more than doubled in 2 years from 2021 to 2023. And this city in transition is a cultural repertoire that points to gradual transformation from an ethno-racially homogeneous periphery to an ethno-racially diverse Central European metropolis with somehow cosmopolitan flavor. This cultural repertoire underlines municipal approaches and also residents' attitudes towards migration and towards immigrants. And what is important was also reflected by our research participants in the interviews. So it's not a label that we impose on the context, but it's something that also appears and shows in the data. And in a similar way, visible minorities is another important concept in relation to the context of the research. So the research focuses on so-called visible minorities, which can be a very problematic concept, right? Because it has the power to reproduce the stereotypes towards these specific groups of people, groups of immigrants. But similarly as with the city in transition, this is self-reflected positionality of our research participants, not an analytical label. And I will explain this a little bit more. So in the Czech context, the immigrants from MENA and Sub-Saharan Africa represent these visible minorities because of their phenotypical features, religiously laden clothing, especially hijab in context of Muslim women, or the use of the mother tongue. So this is not just about visuality, it's also about some audio clues that makes them to stick out at public spaces. As I said, visible minorities is not an analytical label that we impose, but is a self-reflective positionality of research participants who expressed by feelings of sticking out at public and experiences, frequent experiences of othering, this visibility. This means, and why is it important to us, that they are more vulnerable to practices of othering at public spaces. Moreover, they lack historical links. There is not a rich migration history to Czechia of these specific groups of immigrants from these specific regions, and they lack cultural repertoires that would allow them to articulate their belonging to Czechia. So altogether, taking all of these into consideration, we aim to capture the formation of belonging among the population of immigrant groups that experience frequent othering because they consider themselves to be visible minorities in the city, which is only gradually becoming open to increasing ethno-racial diversity of its residents. And now I would like to give the floor to Karel, right? Who will present to you the findings of our research.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I see we have plenty of time, so hopefully I will be able to continue in this fine sticking to schedule. Basically, I guess what is important to keep in mind is that for Sub-Saharan Africans and Middle Eastern and North African migrants, it's not that common occurrence that they would feel at home in general in Czech Republic. In public spaces, they often experience othering or feeling certain tensions, feeling like they are sticking out, they are bringing attention to themselves, etc. They are not completely belonging. However, and that is where the kind of place as a lens comes into play, there are certain places that, let's say, betray or kind of are outliers in this experience, right? There are places to which they can feel as belonging or feel to use this in vivo quote, there are places where they feel at home. And in our results, we kind of offer this preliminary typology of different types of places that make MENA and Sub-Saharan African migrants feel at home. The kind of logic of the typology is that these are the places that through either individual histories and individual experiences allow for attachment of kind of meanings or feelings of comfort and kind of inclusion, belonging, or to a specific characteristics or identity of that place. Right? And there is this like confluence between all those three dimensions. There might be some specific material properties or physical characteristics of the place that make it especially likely to feel homely. There might be certain social say relations or certain social patterns that make it easier for MENA and Sub-Saharan migrants to feel at home in those places. Or there might be a specific symbolic dimension, a specific representation of something that either reminds them of home or represents home for them, that kind of allows for them to have this affective, let's say, experience of homeliness in those places. In general, the typology, we could perhaps perceive it as going from more, from meanings tied more to a personal history, especially through, for example, nostalgia or significant life events or everyday mundane experiences, to more place-specific meanings, maybe meanings that are culturally shared and attached to specific places into which the migrants get kind of socialized after the point of migration, right? It goes more to the meanings specific for the place that are perhaps less dependent on the personal experience. But of course, all these factors kind of go together. There's no clear distinction. It's just analytical lens we have chosen. And of course, this feeling of homeliness, of belonging, is processual, right? It has to be established, maintained, and kind of constantly redone through kind of repeated experiences, through kind of repeating memories, through kind of being reminded of certain experiences or certain significant events. The first set of places that we kind of, the working name is the places of reconnection with native context, are those places where nostalgia plays a significant role. And it is nostalgia for the country of origin, for the place that used to be the home. The places that feel like the home are places that are somehow similar or that remind to our research participants the places where they come from. So, for example, in the first quote, that is a quote about an ethnic African shop where the respondent can find the foods or, let's say, food sources or products that are typical for Cameroon or typical for Africa, right? There's this like material dimension. The place feels like home because there are items that are typical for home. Or there is an atmosphere that is also similar to home, right? So he can feel, despite feeling generally very lonely in Brno, the Czech Republic, at home because the place seems similar to his country of origin. And of course, it represents symbolically. So there's also the symbolic dimension, Cameroon. And it does not have to be that literal, that the place has to have some, let's say, items that are typical for the country of origin. It can be also kind of linked to similarity. to reminding certain significant early life events. So for example, for Helena, Mariánské údolí is a place where she feels kind of at home because it reminds her a place where she grew up. She was kind of growing up in this rural area, surrounded by forest, by a lot of greenery. Right? And of course, the greenery might be perhaps a bit different, but the similarity and kind of closeness and likeliness to her early memories is something that helps her kind of bridge this different or perhaps new context of country into which she migrated with her country of origin. So certain personal web of memories, nostalgia, plays here a significant role. Through connecting the place with kind of nostalgic memories, the place can be made more homely, or so to speak, kind of you can belong through likening it to something that used to be or that is more familiar to places where you grew up. Of course, that was a connection to memories or significant events before migration. However, most of our participants have been in the Czech Republic for a long time or in Brno for a long time, 5 years at least. And there are significant life events that are also connected to places in Brno. The second dimension is, the working name is places of everyday life. Those are the places that are that became familiar to a point that our research participants no longer feel like sticking out in those places, and instead there's this like experience of not only familiarity but perhaps belonging, and it for once connects with this like mundaneness of everydayness of kind of going to those places pretty regularly, so the experience of sticking out gets perhaps lessened. However, it also connects with the significant life events, as is the case of Honza. Of course, perhaps this mundaneness or everydayness can play a role. He's chosen Česká and the meeting spot under the clock that you're perhaps also familiar with. He uses that spot quite often to meet with people that come to visit him. But there's a specific significance that this place, not only because of its material properties, but also because it's a symbolic significance. It represents Brno for him because it kind of reminds him the early days when he came to Brno. It kind of reminds him this experience where he kind of started to get familiar with Brno, and it's perhaps the place that is kind of usual for him. So also it's not only connected to a personal history, because with the meeting spot under the clock, there is this kind of particular, let's say, shared cultural association that it is a place of meeting. It is a place perhaps of where it's common that people are waiting for somebody else, and there's not much, let's say, sticking out if you just like stand there and wait for somebody, etc. But perhaps I'm already talking too long, so let's jump to the third section. And those are the places where this lessening of sticking out, this belonging is somehow specific for the characteristic or identity of the place. We are calling it, again, working title, Places Welcoming Ethno-Racial Diversity. And those are either the places where, to kind of say vulgarly, everybody sticks out a bit, so nobody is really sticking out, right? The place is full of people that are very different. There's not this kind of sense of normality that you are not fulfilling enough. Or those might be also the places where you as a MENA or Sub-Saharan African are sticking out. However, this kind of difference is recognized and welcomed or appreciated. In this quote for Makasafari, it is the first case. She's talking about international school, but there are a lot of people from different backgrounds. So her particularities, her language, her preference for specific foods and tastes that would perhaps make her different or make her stick out are here recognized or tolerated. So to kind of drive it to conclusion, so we have enough time for the discussion. Despite often experiencing othering or this feeling of abnormality sticking out, being somewhat different from the homogeneous general populations, places, and particular places, represent, let's say, this opportunity to be islands of positive deviation, so to speak. This opportunity to develop attachments towards, sorry, I got distracted, to develop attachments to a specific social constellation, specific material elements, or specific symbols connected with the personal histories, as well as the general shared meanings attached to those places. And of course, just kind of to remind you, our perspective, we see this creation of place attachment or homemaking or feeling homely as processual, procedural, constantly being made, kind of remade and confirmed, reconfirmed to also like mundane everyday experiences. Thank you for your attention. And now is time and space for your comments and questions.
Think about 10, 15 years ago, less formal relationship with my mostly former African students when we met outside, but they somehow never took me to church, but always to some nightclub. And this kind of places there, some night bar or a pub. There was one across from the adult theater, the children's theater in the area called Bronx, nearby Sale. The night bar was located nearby in Zagreb. So is there anything like that also? And my second question is, from the last slide, I got the impression that your findings just confirmed what you expected. Is there anything surprising, anything that makes it is interesting, but sociologically interesting, different, or something that might have incited you to elaborate on a theme, a concept, or something? So what was the least expected result about the night bars?
Why the night bars?
Sorry?
Why the night bars? And was
no, these are actually mostly populated in Africa.
Yeah, there is something that there is this tendency in our research data as well. And I think it's because especially the social aspect of places, right? And I had a question for you, whether this was a karaoke bar that you were invited.
I don't remember.
Okay. Because in our data, this is what shows up, that especially like karaoke bars are very popular. Sorry?
Maybe yes.
Yeah.
One thing regarding the bars, and then I have one comment regarding the second question. Hopefully it wasn't the same person as one of our respondents, because we had one respondent that named almost every bar in Brno, and we had a code for a specific urban spaces, and he basically, just that one interview made majority of codes for bars. So for him, that was a very big part of his kind of, let's say, everyday life. So for some people, I guess it might be. However, there were also experiences of, let's say, less social life, kind of. I'm staying mostly at home, except a few places that are kind of my places. And regarding the surprising thing, I mean, this whole paper kind of already stems from our results inductively. So maybe this is kind of the result of already trying to work out the theoretical perspective to capture it. But if there was something most surprising, and I would say it is not reflected in this paper, is that there are spaces of comfortable anonymity. For example, when we were asking about places, or we were asking, I was not asking, I was like just transcribing, okay, about places of where they feel comfortable. Often they mentioned places where there's a lot of people kind of frequenting, right? Náměstí Svobody, or kind of Česká, Masarykova, right? So there's this like sense of comfortable anonymity that in places where there are a lot of different people kind of moving, the experience of sticking out is lessened by kind of default by design. Yeah. So at least for me, that was something unexpected.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to add one thing. I think this is also connected with the second point. Place attachment is a situational concept that we assume that the reason why they feel at home in those different types of places that Karel presented to you is because there is this frequent tension of sticking out that we would like to elaborate in the hopefully next paper, especially in public transportation, but different urban spaces. Okay. And yeah, so what we want to say with this situational concept is that this othering is very, very frequent. These practices of othering that they have to face too. So that's why certain types of places are sticking out of the city of Brno for them, because this happens in a specific situation of a so-called city in transition. So there are not many places like that. That's why they are able to develop this specific feeling of belonging, because they are so rare. So this might be it, but we, as I said, this is still work in progress, and we are looking for some strong overarching argument that would maybe put all of this together. And one more thing was in my mind that I forgot. For me, it was, what surprised me was this level of nostalgia in relation to specific places in Brno that they called being iconic. Like, for instance, yes, you look at me like, okay, like, for instance, what was iconic for them? Němečkovo divadlo, and the place, like, in front of the Němeček theater, which is in the city center, and there's this upside-down fontaine. And also Mariánské údolí, that reminded our research participant from Ghana, I think, her homeland, which was quite surprising, because of this, even if it's different type of greenery, as Karel said, because of this like symbolical depth of the material surface that it communicates. So this strong nostalgia towards their life in Brno, because it's connected with this social gathering and their early days in Brno, when they were socialized into this international community of international students mostly. So yeah, that is it for me. Thank you very much.
Could you please tell us a little bit more about the methodology to go along walks? You know, how they were organized, participated, and who actually set up the agenda of the walk? What instructions you gave to your participants what you wanted them to do, who led the way, and how many stops, how much time you had, and how it all developed.
So I'm just looking if Ivana wants to react because I was on maternity leave when the go-alongs were conducted. But Ivana, can you hear us?
Certainly. Hi, everyone. I can't see you, but I can hear you. Can you hear me well?
We can hear you perfectly well.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, so as for the methodology, we started by conducting in-depth interviews. And at the end of the in-depth interview, we asked research participants to name places where they feel comfortable, where they feel accepted, where they feel well, and also the places where they perceive some sort of a discomfort or that they associate with some negative feelings of othering. And our original idea was to then actually ask them to walk us through both types of places. But we realized that it might be ethically not such a good idea to ask research participants to bring us to places where they experience some sort of othering or where some incidents happen. So we then changed the original idea and actually gave them quite a lot of freedom to design a route for us. So it was an open-ended walk, which started at the place of a research participant's choice. Typically, it was somewhere close to home or to a workplace. And the only instruction which we gave them was to walk us through the city and show us places of their own interest, like places of their everyday life, which they frequent, which they associate with their like daily routines or which they like. And we follow them. And we were kind of focusing on developing the conversation, but as soon as they pointed to a specific place, we asked them to tell us more about what does that place mean to them. So in terms of like a structure, the go-along interviews were pretty open. I would not even call them semi-structured because each of them followed a unique script. And the aim of that methodology was to develop a different kind of narratives, right? To overcome the situatedness of the in-depth interview, which usually takes place, which is a stage conversation, which takes place either in an office or in a coffee place, doesn't really matter where, but it's a state situation, and to give a bit more freedom and power to the research participants to talk about things that matter to their everyday life and basically use the materiality of the city as a prompt to kickstart those conversations. If that answers the question.
Yeah, and the number of interviewees.
The number of interviews for the go-alongs.
Yeah, and how the interviewees and interviewers were matched.
Yeah, so it was 12. This was also some sort of a process because originally we thought that we will conduct a certain number of go-along interviews with all 5 groups of research participants who were involved in the project. So besides people coming from the MENA region and Sub-Saharan Africa, we also interviewed Slovaks, Ukrainians, and the Vietnamese. But precisely because of that experience of sticking out, which was so prominent in the interviews with people from the MENA region and from Sub-Saharan Africa, and were not present in other interviews, including in the interviews with the Vietnamese. This was not a category or something which they would thematize anyhow, or like at least not that strongly. We decided to focus on these 2 groups only. And what we did is that we contacted all the research participants with whom we conducted in-depth interviews previously and invited them to also participate in the go-along interviews, but not all of them decided to do that for whichever reasons. So We have a larger sample of in-depth interviews and then a slightly smaller sample of the go-along interviews, the decision to participate in which was basically done on a voluntary basis with the participants from the previous round of research.
And the go-along lasted from 1 hour to 1.5 hours,
Yeah.
or 2 hours, maybe was the longest one.
Maybe to add about the matching between interviewers and interviewees, there were always at least 2 interviewers. So one person can, for example, take care of the recording, one can focus more on the questions, right? And we're also like taking photos of those like significant places to kind of distribute the share of attention.
Push you to go more for the unexpected in the findings. And also I got the feeling from how you spoke that there is a dichotomy or tray between belonging to something good and sticking out as something negative. What about that it doesn't have to be like that? And I also feel at many places as sticking out. If I'm on a bike in the city, I stick out. If I'm in a gym, I'm too old and too slow. For the others, sometimes I feel like I'm not feminine enough. And I take it as something as it is, and it can be okay, or I can enjoy it. And sometimes it doesn't have to be negative.
Yeah, sure. This might be because stick out, it's an insult label. It's something that appeared in our data and we called it sticking out. We were trying to find trying to capture like this tension that they feel, especially in public transportation, but also in other parts of the city. And we called it sticking out. And belonging is the concept from literature, right? And yeah, this is something that we are not sure whether this like deeper discussion, more thorough discussion belongs to this kind of paper about place attachment, because it's more about positionality in the urban space. So we are not really sure how to connect these two things. If it's not too much for one article, whether it is not 2 articles, but in that case, what would be the surprising fact in this draft of in this article?
I thought about the bars, as Ravi mentioned also, when I was facing that, I was thinking about how could it be, is it cool to be a black or dark man in a bar, or it's not so cool for women? And the public transportation, when you mention it, I would be interested in hearing, what is it? Is it just because there because you look different, or are you too loud for this environment, or
different kind of experiences?
That's the second paper, if I can just intervene, because I also find this fascinating, and it's certainly not just the skin complexion or other like visuals signs of race. It's also the language, the use of the mother tongue. That was something which was very prominent in the data, and which often the research participants feel that it also makes them stick out. Which I find interesting. So there's this like complex interplay of, let's say, like racial and ethnic markers, also of course combined with the gender. But I also think that this is a little bit beyond this paper, because that would bring the discussion into a different direction. But it's an important context for this paper, I feel. And as for the question about the dichotomy, I also don't necessarily feel it as a dichotomy or perceive it as a dichotomy, especially with respect to that third type of what we call thus far like welcoming places. It was not only about everyone being slightly different and thus my difference does not matter, but it was also about me being the only person who is being different, but somehow people through their like acts of care and through their like interest in me and my personal history and my positionality in my life experience making me feel welcome. So that was also important there. And then actually it is that the person somehow sticked out, but that those questions or even touches of the skin and touches of the hair were in that specific place not interpreted as a symptom of ethno-racial othering, but rather as a feeling of acceptance and recognition. And that's an interesting and maybe also somehow counterintuitive or the surprising finding, which we still need to find out how to like frame theoretically so that it also fits within this interpretative framework, but which was quite present.
Another thing about your data, I would like to learn if, to what extent there is an overlap between places to which different people took you, and to what extent, their perception or the narrative about that particular place was the same. And actually, even going beyond that, to what extent there is an overlap within the person with respect to a particular place. Maybe, the place is good at some moment, and then there's a different memory, different situation, different interaction that happened in the same place that was interpreted less beneficial.
That's a really, really interesting point. Regarding the difference, we had those places. For example, right now, my mind goes back to this experience of Přehrada, where our respondent told us that is her place of comfort during the day, but during the night, that is a place of kind of danger and tension that she avoids because, for example, drunk people, etc. Right? So there is perhaps this aspect of temporality as well, and different kind of potential experiences related to place. And when it comes to the overlap, or a lot of people kind of talking about certain place similarly, that is again something that does not fit to our paper, but is something that we
but the similarity is not that interesting because then if it is if the narrative is the interpretation is similar, then we could easily jump to the argument that it is about the place, not about the interactions, about the interpretation, about what. But the differences that may bring you closer to your original aim. You want to show that it is processual. It's not the meaning is not fixed. It's not defined by the place. It's something that happens in the place or in interaction, in response to the place or to something that happened there that gives this the sociological layer of interpretation.
Yeah, and I'm now kind of thinking, and it's again kind of, we decided to not put it into this paper, but, and perhaps that is what was like most surprising to me, is how many kind of respondents picked out Sale as a place that is dangerous or kind of they avoid, not because of direct experience, but because that is something they were kind of socialized into, because people warned them not to go there, etc. But there were like few kind of, let's say, cases, the kind of sticking out cases, to use my favorite word, I guess, where for example, our respondent had a direct experience with living in Sale, and he knew there's a halal shop there, and it was actually a place of kind of familiarity for him, right? Because he kind of transcended this kind of shared meaning attached to a place and developed it through his experience. So that might be an interesting example of what you're talking about, but yeah, it's not in this paper.
I have some follow-up question regarding this marketing question of program design. So, what was the logic of the sampling? So, it's, following the design of the whole thing. So, you have that this kind of possible theory or approach. So, and you seem to be quite clear and complex in relation to how your cases were selected. So it's like some conditions, education, age. So how would you describe this sample. So is this like other like representative cases or critical cases or politically sensitive cases? So extreme cases. So what the data are telling us?
This is something that Ivana might know more about. I don't know if you heard the question of
I'm
Božič.
sorry, you might need to rephrase it for me because I think this is far away from the microphone and I did not hear the question really well.
So I think that this is connected with middling migrants and with this concept of middle class migrants that was the concept that we worked with. So the question was, Jirka would like to know more about the sampling criteria that we worked with. That we clearly discussed some of the characteristics of the sample. But he asked how does it stand in relation to representative research?
It's like meant to represent some group.
Okay.
Or is it like showing something theoretical? So it's like extreme case, showing something
Yeah.
Very sort of methodology.
So whether this is like an extreme group of people in some way, or whether it should represent something, this specific group of immigrants that we have chosen.
Okay, yeah, I'll try to answer that. Of course, it's not representative given the size of our sample, but what was the reason behind this selection and behind this focus on middling migrants is that we kind of wanted to limit the factor of class and socioeconomic status and different social positions which reflect socioeconomic status and class and education as a thing which would diversify the experiences of people that we studied, because the entire research was designed in some sort of a way as a comparative study. We had these 5 groups of immigrants, which we have mentioned previously. So not only people from MENA and Sub-Saharan Africa, but also Slovaks and Vietnamese and Ukrainians. And we were interested in potential differences in their experiences and their views and their perspectives on living in Czechia, and to make the like ethno-racial identities stand out in shaping those experiences. I mean, in a positional manner, right? How they are being perceived by the Czechs and how also those research participants reflect upon their position in Czechia in the light of their ethno-racial identity. We wanted to then limit the effects of class because there's a major difference between immigrants in case they have some working class occupations, but even if they were some elite immigrants, right? We conducted interviews with people who were relatively well educated and had relatively stable and well-paid positions, but they definitely did not belong to elite, let's say, at least in terms of economic affluence. So that was the main reason. And of course, there were some differences. For instance, we learned in the process of this research that actually even the difference between completed high school education and a bachelor degree or master degree seems to play quite a big role, because especially in relation to the research participants from Vietnam, of whom the majority only had the high school education, they perceive their positionality slightly differently than, let's say, the other research participants who managed to complete the university studies. But that's for another discussion. This I'm only saying as an example that even this strategy actually did not allow us to like limit the impacts of education and socioeconomic status completely, but then it also like reflects different profiles of those immigrant groups, because Vietnamese immigrants in general have mostly high school education and only few of them completed university. So
these are privileged migrants in a sense, but this privilege is relative, right? Because so persons who are privileged, when they enter this migration experience, their privilege is lessened in a way. when they appear in a different context of different country, different society, right?
If I may, a follow-up question is speaking about the MENA and Sub-Saharan Africa. So was there any pattern, like a difference between
these two groups?
These two, it might play a role in Brno, because people from MENA may be similar to Roma, maybe, I don't know, to some extent, maybe the differences could be like different.
What comes to my mind is a specific experience of othering of Muslim women. So, yeah, we should maybe like more stress this intersectional perspective, because that's like a assemblage of gender and also religion and also ethno-racial background. So, so yeah, this is like one specific group of our research participants where the experiences of othering are stronger and slightly different. But there is nothing specific that comes to my mind right now when it comes to the comparison between the two groups, MENA and Sub-Saharan Africa people.
Not with respect to place attachment. I think there really the differences do not play out so strongly, or at least not along those typologies or categories of places that we have came up with. But in terms of positionality, yes, because the Muslim, not only women, but also Muslim men have a specific positionality. They often believe, or they often try to pass out as Southern Europeans. So in a way, they don't experience the othering in such a straightforward manner as, let's say, immigrants from Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, I mean the othering based on the visible signs of their racial identity. They, of course, also still experience otherings based on being foreigners or based on being non-Czech speakers, based on their mother tongue. But when it comes to ethno-racial features, they can pass as Southern Europeans, as Italians or Spaniards. This is what they often thematized, so they don't feel they stick out so much.
I would like to just go back to the question about what's interesting, what's sticking out in your findings, and I was wondering if there is a difference in the way people talked about, or what kind of meanings and emotions they attached to different places. Because you've mentioned, for example, the clock and Chesta, which my initial association with that clock is that's a meeting place. People come here, and then when they meet the person, they leave. It's not an interactive place. It's a place that's frequent, so maybe that's a place of comfort. But is it really a place of belonging? And maybe if there is something sticking out like that, especially with those places which are places where everyone belongs, but also it's like it's a place for everyone, but it's also no one's place. Yeah.
Transition place, or
yeah, or like with a lot of traffic. As compared to, for example, the lake, which is an interactive place. One can spend the whole day and have like develop some kind of experiences there.
Yeah, maybe I'm thinking, because in this particular quote, and I will make Ivana smaller, sorry. What's interesting there is that although this might be a transition place. Oh yeah, sorry. Is it better, or I should, yeah? From the current slide. Yeah. There's this like important role of his particular experience, because although it's a transition place or maybe anonymous place, it reminds him early days, right? So there is a personal significance. So I would say it's hard to offer maybe this like typology of places based on kind of closeness of contact or depth of interactions, without kind of taking this dimension, this like personal, individual dimension into play. So yeah.
Okay, so for example, Honza, is there another place that he mentioned and discussed, and were the kind of meanings and emotions similar to the plot, or is there?
Yeah, I think it was specifically displayed in front of the square, in front of a Němeček theater. That it's iconic, and it reminds him like the early days in Brno, and when he travels, he always come back, and when he accepts a visit here in Brno, he always takes the visit there because it's iconic place of Brno, and it's for him, it's connected with a lot of meanings and feelings, but also like everyday routes to work. So he showed us where he works, and also he mentioned like what's the route to work that he takes from number 12. And we asked him, how do you feel here? And he responded, it feels like home, Brno is home. So it also is connected with this everyday like mundane places. And I have one critical remark toward our paper actually, because I was thinking about Martin's comment a lot, and it's connected somehow. So this is not about, and this is not like the best way how to put it, that we have typology of places, because this is not an inherent characteristic of places, that they are good or bad, or more belonging, less belonging, but it's always about the interaction and symbolic meanings, and always about personal history of those people, their web of memories. So for different actors, like different places can mean different things, but this is more like analytical typology, right? It's not that international schools are always in the type 3 and they are like a comfortable environment for ethno-racial diversity, but it's more situational. And I think we should stress this more in typology, that it's not typology of places per se, right? But it's
types of attachments, actually, types of attachments to places.
Yeah, maybe.
You could even maybe think of it as attributed characteristics, like in the sense that it's the characteristics and the mechanisms your respondents attribute to certain.
Thank you for that.
Just a final comment. You said that Hans also talked about Němeček as an iconic place. He was also talking about the clock as a famous place. So it would be maybe interesting to tap into that iconicity also.
Definitely.
I think it was the last comment, because we have to close our meeting. Thank you for once more.
Thank you very much.
It was nice hearing you, even if not seeing you. Thank you for all your comments.
Bye, Ivy. Thank you very much.
To zase, kam se to stalo?
K těbe asi.